Hey
Awesome. And
everybody.
hi,
Hi
Amrita. It's so good
Amrita.
to see you. Oh my gosh,
What a joy.
truly. We're very glad that you have your camera once again, Christy. It's always a joy to get to see your face and to see the folks that we're talking with today, and that we're sharing this really great space of curiosity and questions with. So we are going to get started. Hopefully some more folks will trickle in. So welcome to this Project Peoples webinar. Thank you for taking some time of your day to share your curiosity, your space with us. We're very excited to welcome you and to get to give you the opportunity to hear from our incredible steering council member and webinar guest, Catherine Murupaenga Ikenn, calling in all the way from Aotearoa on her Saturday, which is very generous of her. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to briefly talk about what Project Peoples is and how we began. So Project Peoples is an initiative of the Global Solutions Alliance and Regenerative Intelligence. And Project Peoples researches, communicates, and empowers the implementation of Indigenous solutions to the global climate crisis. And Project Peoples is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I really want to take a moment to share the origin story with you, because I think it's a really powerful one. So Project Peoples began at the 26th Conference of Parties, COP26 in Glasgow, at a very special side event that was hosted by Grounded, which is a nonprofit organization called the House of Original Nations. That was the event. And this was an event elevating Indigenous voices, which is particularly important because Indigenous voices, as I'm sure you know, are often not elevated or prioritized during these international conference proceedings. And as our team was there, especially Chad Frischman, as Chad Frischman was there, listening to the incredible world healing knowledge of Indigenous leaders that they were sharing at this event, he and our team, we felt really moved. We could really hear the potential of Indigenous wisdom, not just kind of intellectually, but also in our bodies, the potential it has to really change the world and help us address climate change in a meaningful and important way. And it was also very clear hearing these Indigenous leaders speak that in spite of having all of this incredible transformative knowledge, their voices were being systematically ignored. And so as Chad was listening, he had this kind of sudden moving idea come to him, a means of uplifting and amplifying Indigenous solutions to the climate crisis. And an idea that would really draw on his experience and expertise creating and communicating powerful information about climate solutions that he developed while at Project Drawdown. And so the idea for Project Peoples is to create a book and a platform to share powerful and transformative information about the impact and potential of Indigenous solutions. This project will thoughtfully weave together Indigenous and Western science, utilizing both to amplify Indigenous leadership and accelerate investment into Indigenous solutions around the world. With the blessing of the Indigenous elders at the House of Original Nations, Project Peoples moved forward and created a steering council of 10 Indigenous leaders from around the globe, one of whom is Catherine, who's kindly joined us today. This council is incredibly diverse. We have folks joining us from communities all around the world, folks of every age and every gender are present. And we also really emphasized diversity in terms of speciality. We have folks who are leaders in the policy space at both international and local levels, folks who are very close to and who are experts in the implementation of solutions, who are instrumental in advocacy. And so bringing together all of these steering council members, they helped lay the foundations for this project, establishing and naming the project's values, developing the research methodology for integrating Indigenous and Western science, and they identified an initial list of Indigenous solutions. I'm going to take a moment to share the graphic that was developed, if my technology will cooperate. One sec. Here we go. So you can really see the potential. Let me make this quite a bit bigger for y'all. Oops, my apologies. I am having some technology difficulties. Okay, here we go. So this is the ecosystem of Indigenous solutions. And as you can see, the council identified 4 large categories of solutions designing for regeneration, including solutions like regenerative clothing made with Indigenous practices, cultivating and living within a healthy environment. You can see that here in yellow, including things like diversified farming systems, eradicating pesticide use, restoring local and seasonal medicines, being able to eat and drink from your environment without fear. We have another section of solutions here on Indigenous communities and rights, including very important things like protecting the lives of Indigenous communities, keeping Indigenous peoples in their territories, empowering women, and Indigenous knowledge-based educational systems. And then we also have this subset of solutions here on restoring and protecting ecosystems, including mangrove protection, biodiversity conservation, and one of the ones that I really love up here, and that was really transformative for me, protecting ecosystems through culture. All right, thanks for your patience with the technology there. And so today, Project Peoples is continuing to build on this foundation. We're currently raising funds to hire 25 Indigenous solutionists who will work together to research these solutions and integrate these knowledge systems, bringing us a step closer to creating this transformative book and platform that Project Peoples is dedicated to advancing. If over the course of this session, you feel moved to donate to Project Peoples, we do have a crowdfunding campaign, Project Peoples funded by the Peoples, and we'll drop the link in the chat if you feel so moved. And so with that introduction to what Project Peoples is and how it's bringing us together today, I'm going to turn it over to Chad to introduce Catherine for the speaking today.
Thank you so much, Kat, and thank you all for joining. We're really such a pleasure to see folks as we're a growing community around Project Peoples. And so, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. A lot of folks coming from, as we heard, from Etora all the way over from California and back around the other end, both directions. So people for coming in from all over the world. It's my real distinct honor to introduce one of my favorite humans, today's speaker for Project Peoples, Catherine Murupaenga Ikenn. Catherine is a remarkable advocate and leader whose work bridges human rights, climate justice, and Indigenous knowledge, inspiring change on both local, regional, and global scales. Catherine hails from the Maori peoples of Aotearoa, known to many as New Zealand, with a Master's of Laws and extensive experience in Indigenous activism. Catherine has dedicated much of her life to championing the rights of Indigenous peoples and addressing critical issues like environmental and climate justice. Her impressive career includes roles such as the Senior Indigenous and Minorities Fellow at the United Nations Pacific Field Office, a negotiator for the Ingati Kuri Historical Treaty Claims settlement with the New Zealand government, and co-chair of the Pacific Caucus for the Global Preparatory Conference for the United Nations World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. She is also was the Project Peoples representative at the recent UN gathering for the Permanent Forum for Indigenous Peoples. Her contributions have elevated Pacific Indigenous voices to the highest levels of global governance, and she continues to work tirelessly as a researcher, a policy writer, and advocate for various UN agencies, and also, I would say, as a critic at times of those very UN agencies, really holding their feet to the fire to ground them into their core mission of human rights. And she has been an advocate, a vocal advocate for ensuring that the human rights remains at the heart of the UN system. Beyond her work in human rights, though, Catherine is deeply passionate about metaphysics, Indigenous traditional knowledge and wisdom, an area she is actively exploring and plans to publish more on in the near future. So today, Catherine's going to share her insights and expertise, drawing on a lifetime of advocacy, lived experience, and deep cultural knowledge. Please join me in welcoming the one and only Catherine Murupaenga Ikenn to our session today. Catherine, onto you.
Kia ora. Oh, thank you for those generous remarks. I also want to give my thanks and appreciation to Project Peoples and Regen Intel for sparking off this initiative. Very timely in the world today. And I'm just keen to get into a conversation, yeah, about whatever interests our audience. And yeah, so Kat, I'll hand over to you. This might be confusing, cat and cat. Anyway.
No, you're good. Thanks for rolling with it, Catherine. Yeah, I think one of the places we were kind of hoping to start this discussion today is really kind of digging deeper into the work that you've done. And so I know one of the kind of the fundamental beliefs to Project People is this understanding that Indigenous wisdom, Indigenous solutions have profound potential for global impact. And I'm really curious, as someone who's been championing this impact and working to advance it, could you share the ways that you have seen this impact kind of come to life, and also maybe the ways that you see the potential for it, kind of your vision for how you'd like to see these solutions used and come to life?
Sure. So I want to kick off by saying my training traditionally in my home community has been as what we call a kaiwhakatara, which is to say like a provocateur, someone who beta tests propositions, ideas, the integrity of actions, and that's a love-hate kind of position to be in, if you can imagine, in your community and in your nation. And as Chad kind of gave a bit of a hat tip to, in the international sphere, because like he said, you're holding people's feet to the fire. You're not always beloved in that position, because you're mirroring back to decision makers and those so-called leaders. Are they really leading in the right way? It also tests your own self. I mean, this here is part of our culture. We call it moko. And what it is, it's a declaration to the world. And every time I look in the mirror, it talks about my standards, my origin story, my dreams for the future, where I am right now. So yeah, it's a daily practice, and you have to push the reboot button constantly, because humans are imperfect. We strive to be like Māori. You know, our origin story, we come from the supernatural ancestors. We call them atua. That term has been kind of Christianized, you know, in more modern times as God or gods, but it's actually not that. Yeah, because we aren't here in the supernatural ancestors over there. We actually have a genealogical track to them. To Mother Earth, we call her Papa Tuanuku. Interestingly, our word for genealogy is whakapapa. Whakapapa. Whaka means to create or bring into being. Papa's like a hat tip, a reference to Papa Tuanuku, Earth Mother. So that in itself tells you. But the word papa is interesting too, because in our Māori language, and you mentioned culture, Kat, right at the top, you know, part of our what Regen Intel is about, amplifying Indigenous culture. We can talk more about that. But in our Māori language, when you have a word and you put it next to itself, it gives a transcendent meaning of the original word. So pa means to touch. So if you say papa, a transcendent idea of that, I don't know if you want to throw your 2 cents worth in now, a transcendent idea of touch, connection. So whakapapa is all of that. And so, and here's where you've got to bring me back, because sometimes I go way out there and have to come way back. But culture is really important. That's kind of who I am. That's my origin story. That's my platform of departure for how I live. I come from the source sovereign being, first creator, Io matua kore. Io, the parentless one, Io who has no parents, Io who resides in this realm. We call it te kore kore. Kore means nothing. Here we go again, Māori language. Kore means nothing. Transcendent idea of kore, when you put it beside itself, what is that? We call it pure potential. It's not nothing. It's more than nothing. It's pure potential. It's not something even. It's still only in its potential, you see. So Io Matua Kore, the source sovereign, resides in that realm of pure potential. Now we're talking quantum physics. Hello. That's the big inside joke amongst Indigenous peoples, is that we knew all this stuff before even the Western scientists caught up with it, and they're still lagging. There's still so much more to know about the nature of reality from Indigenous peoples. If only, you know, you'd let us in and have a conversation with us as peers, not as colonizer above and Indigenous below. No, 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 as peers. Yeah, so that's the big sort of beginnings about the value of Indigenous knowledge. It's just so massive. It's hard to squeeze into just one little webinar session. But yeah, if you want to like focus me in, Kat, do it.
Okay.
But there's a lot to say about that.
Yeah, I think I'm still kind of absorbing it, and I'm really curious, I guess, kind of to reflect back some of what I heard. And so I heard you talking about the potential that Indigenous wisdom has to really help us transcend kind of the limitations or the limitations that colonization has imposed on reality. And so using Indigenous solutions, Indigenous wisdom, and Indigenous leadership to better understand and kind of achieve or start the path to that transcendence. Does that feel right?
Yeah, because, you know, Regen Intel and many, you know, NGOs are doing great work on the physical level. You know, we're whack-a-moling all of these, you know, we're planting trees, and we're doing the mangroves, and we're protecting our oceans, and we're, you know, that is excellent. Keep doing it. However, from an Indigenous perspective, a high level, you pull right out back billions of years, and you look back at Earth right now in this moment. The real crisis is of consciousness. And if we don't address that crisis, and people say, well, how do you do that? I know it's a paradigm shift in the heart, as well as it's a paradigm shift, right? Yeah. But if you look at all the ancient, you know, wisdoms, teachings, philosophies, they all talk about this point of departure has to be your values, you know, it has to be your understanding about your relationship with the environment. That's the crisis we're in. The Western world, from an Indigenous perspective, I keep just saying stereotypically Indigenous, but really this is my Māori upbringing. I don't really want to speak for any other Indigenous peoples, but there does tend to be a shared sort of perspective, worldview, cosmology amongst Indigenous, just saying, there does tend to be. And it is our relationships with the environment is really what matters first. It's not that there are resources to be exploited. You know, that's not what nature is about. It's not humans here, nature over there. Humans are part of nature, so we need to be in right relationship. And it boggles my mind and my heart as to why that's such a hard concept for the Western world to get. But that's where we have to get to if we're going to heal all of these pathologies going on in the world. It's the pathology inside our heart and mind. That's really the first thing we've got to clear up. We've got to tidy up. We've got to heal. So it's a crisis of consciousness, first and foremost, I would say, that we have to do. Yeah.
Wow. I think that's really, really interesting. And I'm very curious. I think I know a lot of the work that you've been doing is in the international advocacy space. You mentioned you are a provocateur, which I love. And I'm curious, could you speak kind of to how you're looking at some of the international work you're doing, maybe some of the kind of policy-based solutions, and how you see those as part of trying to bring us closer to right relations, and kind of how do you think about that, both at kind of a very high level, but then almost in kind of like the ways that you approach that work or interpersonally with folks on almost on kind of like a more of a daily level. I'm really
Sure.
curious about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and some people think high level, that's not really practical. But to me, the spiritual, the consciousness work is the very practical work that we're not doing. To me, it's very practical. It's the most practical. But yeah, in the UN space, so in 2005, I was, a fellow with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, an Indigenous fellow. We learned all about the human rights system and the Indigenous human rights in that system, how to promote and protect it. The interesting thing is, from an Indigenous perspective, rights isn't the point of departure. It's our obligations. It's our obligations to our relatives in nature. So that's a construct, but we're working with it. We're optimizing that construct. It's the colonizers' way of seeing the world. But if we had our own way, we would have flipped that narrative on its head and said, we need a declaration of obligations, actually. But we're working with it as it is. Yes, so I started in 2005, and over a series of decades, it's now 20 years almost, it's 2024, I have come to realize that there's a lot of corruption in the UN system, just saying. And you might take that as, it's like technically corrupt, like they're not maybe coming up with the right projects for working with the environment, or maybe like the Paris Agreement is technically, it's not as strong in its language or something like that. That kind of corruption, that is there. But there is also another kind of corruption, which is the infiltration of pathological agendas, corporate agendas, into the mechanisms and the policies of the United Nations system. I can give plenty of examples about that. Here's one, the Food and Agriculture Organization. They've got a lot of contamination by the food and agriculture industrial complex agenda. For example, you look at the World Health Organization, it's the same thing. They've got big pharma infiltrating in there. You look at the International Seabed Authority. They're meant to have a mandate to protect the ocean environment, but at the same time, they're kind of schizophrenic because they've also got this mandate that they can dish out permits to go, deep sea mining and such. So, I could go on and on. Not even to mention the Security Council, which is impotent. It's meant to be, a place where you help peace to emerge in the world, and all they can do is, they can't do anything. There's all these wars happening. So I work in that space to, like Chad said, to keep them honest and to mirror back to them that you have these standards and you're violating your own standards. I mean, even in the climate space, you've the push for renewable energy. Boy, that is controversial amongst Indigenous peoples right there. I mean, the amount of environmental destruction that occurs to mine all these metals and minerals to make all these renewable devices and infrastructure, and then where is the equitable distribution of wealth, even when you get these electric vehicles? And I own an electric vehicle because I think on the spectrum of fossil, electric, I'm going to, go towards EVs. But I know it's only, a few degrees of connection, and I am connected to exploitation of vulnerable people to mine these minerals and metals in different parts of the world, environmental destruction. And then when these EVs get out into the marketplace, they're not affordable for, ordinary people, let alone Indigenous communities. So it's just a hornet's nest of, complexity, and there needs to be a transition to this new earth that we envisage, which is fair and equitable for everyone, not just the global north, leaving out the global south, and not just for the west, leaving out Indigenous communities. It has to be for everyone. And another example, if I can just give another example, speaking of energy, I spoke at an International Ocean Energy Conference in Australia, Melbourne, a couple of months ago. And obviously there's a big push for new technology, new devices, because they're looking at the ocean as the world's biggest battery. Okay, that's all good. I'm all good with the idea. But one technology that really got me feeling upset and resistant, and I urge people to look out for this and others, is working with temperature in the deep water and the shallow water, right? So the idea is the water down deep is really cold, the water up close is warmer. So that temperature differential can drive a mechanism. When it's moving, it generates energy. Okay. I can't go into the details because I can't even articulate exactly the technology, but you get the drift. So here's little old me. I'm not a technician. I come along as an Indigenous person looking at just that. And here's what I say. All right, so you're using huge volumes of water to drive this device of yours. Oh yeah, okay. So you're sucking up, you can tell where I'm going with this. You're sucking up all this deep, nutrient dense, which it is, water from the bottom. You're moving it all up with all these organisms with it to the surface. You're what, doing what with it? And then you're moving all that other water from the surface down. What is that doing to the ecology? And I haven't even talked about, you've got to put the mechanism down on the seabed floor or something, that's going to have a destructive impact. But moving all that water around is going to have an impact on the ecology. You can't just take nutrients away from that part of the ocean and expect the organisms down there to still thrive in the same way. And then we heard that there were the industrial food production people are looking at all the nutrients in the water and thinking, oh, we can take that and we can do a land-based, I don't know, shrimp farming or something, and we can turn that into profit. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm sure the ordinary people won't be able to really afford the food. It's not going to go where it needs to go. And the electricity, no one's going to guarantee it's going to be affordable for, so they're calling it, I look at it like the green revolution. It did not revolutionize food. There are still starving people in the world. This is going to be the same. It's not going to revolutionize energy. So, these are Indigenous perspectives that I'm bringing, asking the scientists, how are you going to monitor? We can't even monitor on-land mining. How are we going to keep our eye on what you're doing way down there? We cannot do it. We don't trust you. We don't trust you. So, these are the voices that Indigenous peoples do. We just keep on harping on and on and on about it, hoping someone will listen to us. It's not rocket science. It's basic values, that we just, it's basic.
Yes, it certainly is. And I have kind of one more question I want to ask before we're going to open it up for the audience. So audience members, start letting those questions bubble up for you. I think something that you've really been talking about and highlighting through these examples is something that came up and that I felt I learned a lot of in our steering council meetings, which is the idea that Indigenous solutions are science. And there's science with a value system, right? It's knowledge with a set of principles for how it should be used and what you should think about. And so I guess I was curious, almost a little bit to circle back. Could you help us understand how, like, one of the things you said is that there's a very fundamental difference between a rights-based framework and an obligations-based framework, and it sounds to me like those are connected. Can you help us understand kind of how the obligations give us a different set of values to operationalize than the rights-based one would, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Yeah, sure. It's really just about, you've heard of this, the Western science, they have a term, fractal universe, right? Well, we knew that from primordial times, which is to say, back to connection again, there's micros and macros you can talk about in terms of physical, like, look at me. I'm a human body, but if you look at my cells, you go down to my cellular level, every cell has the same functions as the body does. Excretion, propagation, community, even they find cells work in community. You know, all these things happen with the individual. You go out to the further out to nature, the world, the biosphere, same thing. They have the same properties and characteristics as the body does as an individual. We're all connected across space time, fractal too. You know, billions of years, this little point in time, it's just one, like, if you can imagine it in a subset, what do they call those concentric circles, like those Russian dolls? And it goes out into the future as well as moving back into the past. And you must look at your past to understand your now if you're going to move forward in a, you know, a way that's going to be life enhancing into the future. You've got to learn your lessons from the past. Humans aren't learning our lessons from the past. We're just like sort of swiping left on those, like nothing, you know, ever existed that we can learn from. If we got amnesia, what is going on? We need to have memory. Our body holds memory, and our minds have memory, and our hearts have memory, but we need to have the courage to say, oh, we've made some mistakes, you know, learn from them and course correct. Again, that's what Indigenous peoples are saying. We just need to live, and we say in a tika pono aroha way. Tika is what's right and correct. Pono is what has integrity and what is true. And aroha is, you know, compassion, all those basket of things that, you know, values based. And by the way, aroha is an awesome word again. You've got bookended with aroha, references ra, the sun, enlightenment, light, enlightenment, wisdom. Aro means to focus. Ha is breath. And we think of breath as permeating everything, the breath of life. Breath, I'm breathing the same air the dinosaurs did, fractal. You know, in that one word, aroha, oh my goodness. Oha means legacy. I mean, there's so much from language, Indigenous language, that we can learn. It's just amazing. That was my answer.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And I always feel so grateful when you generously share and go into those details and those nuances of language and the Maori.
It's soft technology.
Yeah.
All this stuff is soft technology. It is technology, native science and technology.
It's marvelous, and it just makes my mind expand so fast.
It's meant to make your mind expand. Exactly right. You got it, Kat. It's meant to. That's the intention. Yeah.
It's incredible. Well, I am also kind of wearing my role of timekeeper, and I'm aware that our audience, I would imagine, has a lot of really wonderful questions that they would love to ask. And so for audience members, if you would like to raise your hand, we'll spotlight you. You can ask a question. If you're in the middle of something and you can't do that, you're also welcome to use the chat. So if I know you're someone driving, ask whatever question is the best for you as you drive. Yeah, but very curious who has questions they would like to surface. Yeah, Cameron.
Fortunately, I'm stopping at a stoplight, so I can do it. Thank you so very much. So inspirational. Someone just me just this morning with the Maori MP tearing up papers and protesting in New Zealand.
Woman.
So it's so wonderful. Yes, thank you. I guess, yeah. What would you say would be the top three priorities right now for us collectively to focus on? How can we help you and the Indigenous communities? What would you say are the top three things that we could do as individuals?
Awesome question. Thank you so much. So an easy one is Indigenous human rights. And now, you know, my caveat is, like I said earlier, for us, our focus would be on obligations, but everything has its flip side. So for all the rights, you can also imagine obligations. But I say to people, do whatever you can to advocate and promote and call for the realization of Indigenous human rights, because the infrastructure, the architecture is there. Nation states have agreed to them. So hold their feet to the fire on that. When you're helping Indigenous peoples, you're helping yourself, because we're the last, line of defense. We are, for all these pathologies in the world. So that's a good concrete one. The other is get more into I'm into metaphysical activism. Like I say, I'm about the spiritual work we need to do. I'm not talking about religious, all right? I'm talking about metaphysical. Call it, you put a label on it how you like, but I'm talking about, you can call it scientific, quantum physics if you like. If you're not into like spiritualism or anything, you don't have to be anymore, because the Western science is echoing what Indigenous peoples are saying. So go there if you want. But what they're saying is human consciousness creates reality. This whole thing about holographic universe, everything in the 3D is the illusion. Science is actually saying that now. We're having this big bang of Indigenous wisdom, faith-based religion, spiritual beliefs, and science right now. It's the most exciting time to come alive. Investigate it for yourself and look for, okay, how can I integrate those practices into my own life? Because when you do, from a values-based place, you are helping create a new earth with a vision of living in harmony. So that's the second one. What would my third one be? I would expand out beyond climate crisis as a concept. There's been a lot of weaponization of the whole, we've got carbon credits and all this sort of stuff. It's been weaponized by the corporations. What we should be focusing on is the health of the whole ecosystem and the environment. Clean water, clean air, soil that's healthy. These are the things, they're the bedrock, the building blocks of healthy civilizations. And if people are, focused on the economy, okay, all right, what it is what it is. But you need a healthy environment for a thriving economy. Hello. So keep circling every conversation back to environment, and remind people that people are part of the environment. So you can't just kick Indigenous peoples off our lands to like fortress, conservation, the environment. No. So those are three things I would do.
Thank you. And just one follow-up question on number two. On number two, what would you recommend as far as to help educate on kind of the metaphysical, I think it was the consciousness and the quantum physics? Is there something you recommend that brings the quantum physics and Indigenous?
Yeah, look, there's this really amazing architecture that already exists in society. It's called the education system. If we got the right curriculum, look, everyone should do philosophy. Localize your school curriculums and include Indigenous philosophies into the philosophy that you're learning about. It's not just about the old Greeks. It's not just about Descartes. I did philosophy with my law degree. I actually did that. And I found it incredibly enlightening, and it really went well with my law degree. It expands your mind. But they didn't teach about Indigenous philosophy at university. Ooh, their loss, our loss, everyone's loss. So school curriculums need an overhaul, and civics too, I would say. It all relates back to civics, because it's all about decision making. And as a sovereign, you need to know about if you want quantum physics, or how reality is actually created, because as sovereign you need to make decisions which are the best, value-based, high standard based. So that's kind of the answer.
And just one last point to your point about localization is that I grew up in Iowa, who was never taught that Iowa is named for the Iowa Indians. So I totally agree. Thank you so much.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly. Right on.
Thank you so much for those great questions and those really marvelous responses, Catherine. I see we have a question in the chat from Anna Steltenkamp. And so that one is, what are some recommendations for facilitating that consciousness work with others? For example, how to invite people into experiences or conversations that welcome connections with the natural world in a way that makes sense to us to feel a part of those living systems with younger or older generations.
Sure. It's all about doing our own research. You know, you've got this incredible universe of a database, you know, at your fingertips these days. And I know there's a lot of, you have to sift through because there's a lot of junk out there as well as really excellent data. But that's our responsibility. That's on us. The other thing too is I believe there's a, you know, the UN sustainable development goals, the SDGs. There's a group that has created its own movement to kind of push the SDGs to go more into the soft technology side of what is sustainable for civilization. I think it's called the Inner Development Goals. Inner Development Goals. If you internet search Inner Development Goals, you'll find this growing movement. Now, they don't really, I think they could still do even better. They could go beyond, not just to talk about soft technology in terms of our conflict resolution skills and being mindful. You know, those are all great. They've got a whole list of them. It's really awesome. And I've joined their network along with some colleagues of mine, and we're going to push them to get more into the metaphysics because that's what it's missing. But so, yeah, go and start there maybe. But there are, yeah, you'll find there are lots of emerging movements that are realizing, like heart-based science. We know, right, the heart is the ruling organ of the human mind. It's not actually the brain. There are more signals going from the heart to the brain than the brain to the heart. And the electromagnetic field of the heart is multiple times bigger, that can measure this scientifically, than the brain's electromagnetic field. And for Māori people, we know there's a third brain. It's actually in your gut. And believe it or not, science is actually finding neurons in the gut. So what is it? Neurocardiology. We know there's neurons in the brain. There's neurons in the gut. So, you know, Indigenous wisdom, hello, again, we knew it before Western science. I'm just saying it's just such a joke. But yeah, great question. Good luck with that.
I wanted to jump in a little bit. I want to jump in a little bit, Catherine, because you always make me smile. One of my favorite people to talk to at any time. And I love you to bringing this up around you know, learning philosophies in our education systems. And I just want to like point out something really like we often misplace and don't really understand much, or we don't really connect this in our modern contemporary world. The ancient Greek philosophies were like 3,000 years old. Right, these are ancient ways of knowing and understanding the world too, right? And we sort of like put them on some kind of pedestal. And even today, when we're thinking about philosophies that we, you know, have evolved, we're still challenging and developing, or still like challenging ourselves to think about the very same issues about ourselves, about who we are, what we are in relation to the world that the ancient Greeks 2,000 years ago were also talking about. And so I'm not saying there's one's better or another. It's just that they're also ancient wisdom. They are also ancient wisdom they're bringing in today and should be learned in parallel with ancient wisdoms of the Amazonian peoples, and ancient wisdom of the Maori peoples, and the ancient wisdom of the Hindu peoples, and the ancient wisdom of the Chinese peoples. And all of these other peoples and these philosophies and knowledge systems are still relevant today as they were, you know, 3,000 years ago. And we have this sort of a notion that we have moved beyond, but we haven't. We still go back, even our own current Western dominant education systems, to ancient wisdom 2,500 years ago. People still learn Plato and Aristotle and all these things, you know, and the Roman philosophers and historians. And so we need to really expand our way of thinking. Like if we place value in this, why wouldn't we place value in so many other ways of knowing? So I really love that you're bringing that point up. And just a point of fact, the ancient Greeks' description of the heart was the gut. And it's just been mistranslated to the heart here. But when you're talking about what the characteristics of the heart, the ancient Greeks actually said it was the stomach. So in the language of ancient Greek, they also knew this at that time. And so it's really going back to these sort of more basic understandings of who we are in connection to the world, to nature, is something that's even shared amongst Western, this silly distinction of Western versus Eastern and North versus South. I mean, it's just people share these wherever they are. And we've just had one linear dominant culture take over and like impose upon it. So I really love that you bring this up and see these interconnections. I also want to ask and say we should talk about the regenerative development goals, the RDGs, which is Region Intel starting to propose. And we want to do this as the post 2030 agenda and incorporate inner development, sustainability, and move to a regenerative system. So we should really weave in Project Peoples from day one in that discussion as well.
Neat, love it. I encourage people to find your own truth, basically. That's really challenge establishment narratives. That's what kai whakatara do, because it's like science. Science is meant to be skeptical. Western science is meant to be skeptical. Even, you know, our indigenous perspectives, they're not static. I mean, we have some, you know, we call them kawa. Like if you go onto our ancestral meeting grounds and the ancestral meeting house, we have protocols. That's kawa for, you know, people moving into that space, greeting one another, sharing in that, you know, your conduct inside the meeting house. There's kawa, and that's solid, because that comes from io, you know, that's like handed down by the atua. No one's really going to move that. But alongside that, you have tikanga. And tikanga, as you might remember the word tika, which means what's right and correct. And tikanga is like your practices. Now, the tikanga can change. And it's almost a metaphor. It's like a metaphor for a person's life. There is kawa, there is values that are solid, and, you know, I've got my values and they're there. I'm probably never going to shift. There's some that are just immovable. But the tikanga, how I play my game of life, is mine to own. Mine. And it's the same with the universe. You keep expanding out. There's a kawa of the universe that will not change over billions of years. But the tikanga of the universe, you know, you've got galaxies moving, creating, just being created, destroyed. You've got, you know, solar systems. You've got all kinds of things going on in the universe. It might change. The whole thing about holographic universe, as, you know, opposed to molecular universe. I don't know, that's a human perspective, but yeah, you've got this dynamism between kawa and tikanga. And with science, it should be skeptical, is what I want to get to. And it's interesting these days. I think Western science is moved away from skepticism, because as soon as someone introduces a new idea, everyone's piling on them. Oh no, you can't say that. We've always known it to be X, and now you're saying it's Y. You know, the arguments that they had with quantum physics back in the day. But hey, it was like spoiler alert back then. Now quantum physics, it's safe to talk about that. And there's so many other examples I can give. So when you see scientists saying, oh no, you can't bring this new theory in because it's done, the science on that is done. As soon as you hear a scientist say it's done, it's over, you look at them sideways and go, I don't think so. That's, people thought flat earth was science was done. So yeah. And I might add, I think, like the World Council of Churches in 2012 apologized for the doctrine of discovery. I think the scientific community ought to do the same for Indigenous peoples and apologize for their doctrine of discovery of Indigenous knowledge and claiming it as having discovered it as science. No, not on.
No, yes, I don't have the words to articulate how good a point that is, especially after not just claiming to discover Indigenous science, but having excluded Indigenous science for ages is not science. So that certainly seems like a call that needs to be issued. I do know we are drawing kind of towards the close of our shared time together today, and I just wanted to create some final space and ask, is there anything else you'd like to share with this group of curious supporters, Catherine, before we leave? And John, if you pop your question in the chat, maybe we can see if that kind of prompts something that Catherine may also want to share. So.
Yeah, I just want to encourage us all to look beyond our differences and focus on our shared, priorities, concerns, attributes, aspirations. I mean, the Indigenous people know the colonizers' really, really effective way is divide and conquer. But it's colonizers do that not just to Indigenous peoples, they do that just to people, ordinary people, which is why I say all of us, Indigenous or otherwise, we're in this together to reconstruct a harmonious future. So get together with people. If you've got differences, leave them at the door. Focus on, we've got to clean up our environment. We've got to put in place governance and decision-making bodies and entities of integrity. We don't have that now. We've got a fascist government in New Zealand. That's why the Māori people are rising up, and that's why we're walking all the way to Parliament to tell them what we think of them and to call for the whole nation to come together and create a better, government with more integrity. And that includes Māori having our own institutions, sovereign institutions as well, which is what was intended in 1840 when we welcomed the settlers to come and live here in Aotearoa. That was actually what was intended. It's there in writing in the Indigenous language. So yeah, diversity, we need to protect diversity and come together despite diversity. That's what we need to do.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that really powerful kind of closing call with us. I captured part of your quote in the chat because I know I want to look at it every day. That it's very inspiring. And so we are nearing the close of our time here together today. I echoed Janvi in the chat. She's sharing her gratitude for the topics addressed in this call and how valuable and needed they are at this time. And so thank you so much for sharing your weekend with us, Catherine, and your really amazing and mind-expanding insights with us. And thank you all to everyone who's joined us for this session today. I hope that it's given you a next right step, a next thing to explore and go off in the world as you work to create the more harmonious future we're all striving towards. And so if you have any additional questions about this or about Project Peoples, how you can support us in this work going forward, please go to projectpeoples.org. And please be sure to follow Catherine on LinkedIn and other platforms to support her work as well. We'll share those in the follow-up email. So thank you all so much for your time here with us today. I hope that the rest of your day is filled with some additional beauty and joy after such a provocative call. All right. Be well, everyone. Good luck.
Thanks, Kat. Thanks, Kat. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Catherine. And stay tuned. We'll be doing these once a month. So we're doing more, meet more of the student council members. Thank you, everybody.